Communities and games are a very important and very difficult topic to discuss because depending on the games you played, you might have experienced an entirely separate community, or depending on how you played, you might have experienced an entirely different part of a community than others. But I don't think any individual will doubt or disagree with the concept of a community impacting not only how you experience and play a game, but also how others interpret it even if they don't necessarily play that themselves. The prime examples I'm going to use is Blue Archive, Shanghai and Genshin Impact because they're developed by the same company and they're vaguely similar, alongside games such as Punishing Grey Raven or Arknights. I think each of these games have entirely different communities, and the developers themselves take different approaches to interacting and, in some ways, encouraging that community. And as a direct result, the experience the player bases have and the experiences the players have of each other is very different. An example is, I'm a Blue Archive content creator primarily. Let's be honest here, most of my videos are in Blue Archive with an occasional mix of Genshin/Arknights. With that being said, in my personal opinion, my ranking for the communities from best to worst would be Blue Archive, Arknights, both of which are equal, then Genshin, and actually before Genshin I'd probably put Shanghai. The popularity of a game obviously does impact its own community itself because you're going to get a lot of individuals who maybe aren't used to gacha games or the gameplay style or even how the company does things. So Genshin is in a very odd position out of all these because it's the most popular game, it's the most well known, and as a direct result there's a very high chance you're going to have individuals who maybe never played a gacha game before or maybe aren't interested in those type of games. So as a direct result they're expecting a lot from a basically free game, even though you do have the microtransaction aspect of the game, i.e. the virtual currency, Genesis Crystals, Primogems, the rolling and gacha itself. A lot of individuals kind of view it like a fully fledged game, like Breath of the Wild, like newer $60 or $70 games. Meaning that you do have the individuals who look at the content or lack thereof in certain areas and are expecting more or saying there should be better. But I digress. When I'm just discussing the community itself, I discuss how they interact with each other. Not only the players themselves, but the developers and how they treat their player bases, how the content creators that play and cover that game itself are interact with one another, whether there's drama that unfolds, whether it's relatively calm, that sort of thing. I was discussing this in my Discord server with a few other individuals. Join if you're interested. But ultimately, what we kind of came to the conclusion of is the communities do have a very big impact, and Blue Archive is a primary example of that. Whilst Blue Archive isn't the most popular gacha game, the community itself is much more calm and chill than others. At least from my own personal experience, there hasn't been any drama with content creators. There hasn't been a content creator canceled. There hasn't been a trending movement on Twitter to cancel or attack and harass any individual developers, creators, or players. So from an outside perspective, sure, you have the Blue Archive sort of stereotype in which players are oftentimes going to focus on, or outside players at least, are going to focus on the age or the setting of the characters themselves in the game. But once you get into the community, it's a much more welcoming community. Everybody understands, hey look, there's really great artists in this community, there's really great official art, the game is really nice, and everybody kind of accepts the more lewd, not safe for work aspect of the game and of the art. And depending on what you like, realistically, you can like anything and then you want in the game, and no one's really going to be mad at you for it. Whereas if you like some individuals in games like Genshin, people may be much more inclined to view you in a worse way, interact with you worse, or treat you worse. Don't get me wrong, this is subject and this happens in many other games, let's be honest here. But the popularity of Genshin has made this arguably much worse. Blue Archive has added new features over time. We have increased rates, which is happening globally next after it's occurred in JP. I don't know if it's occurred already, so my information on that is a little bit spotty, but correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section. You have official art that's really well drawn and really beloved by the community. You have the more lewd aspects, whether that be on Pixiv or any other site, that honestly is pretty well endorsed and embraced by the community itself. You even have the more competent individuals, whether that be higher ranking players that aren't necessarily pushing for more meta or more difficult content, not pushing newer players into pulling for meta reasons. It's a lot more of, hey, you like this character? Pull them then. And sure, you have the units that are really good, like Hako, but you aren't forced into a situation in which every player is going to tell you, pull this character because they're great, or don't pull this character because they're trash. You can find individual community reviews and discussions on units, but a lot of those discussions are more based around the lore aspect or the stories of a character rather than saying this is good, they're a meta character, pull them now. Now, if we're going over to Arknights, in my opinion, my first interaction with Arknights and with that game series was via Tecton's discussions of it. I used to see his ads, then when I got into Genshin, he started talking about how much he disliked Arknights, and that soured my perception of the community before I even had a chance to play the game myself. Now, I may talk a bit about Arknights here and there and about how I dislike its way of storytelling, but I do think the game and the community is really, really good and really solid. You'll find comprehensive reviews on units. You'll find discussions on whether the character is good or bad, and no one is pushing you towards a meta. No one's pushing you towards individual polls. Once again, like Blue Archive, it's a very chill and calm community, to the extent to where it's much more welcoming, much more easy to get in than, say, another game in which you may have individuals prioritizing the meta, prioritizing what's good and bad to newer players. In my opinion, if you're a new individual trying to get into Arknights, you have a lot of resources available to you, and even if you post discussions, people are pretty quick to answer and tell you, hey, this is what I recommend, every unit is good, etc. It's not as hardcore and not as unwelcoming and unpleasant as a lot of individuals may make it out to be. Both games have solid communities, and they're all really solid games. Genshin, Arknights, Honkai, Blue Archive, they're all really solid games, but in my opinion, the welcoming aspects of each of these games is very different because the community is very different. Genshin, while being the most popular, is perhaps the most well-known overall, but it's arguably the difficult one to get into because of how dramatic the community itself is. And if you're watching this and you're a Genshin Impact player, I'm not saying you're a bad individual. I'm saying a lot of times, and a lot of individuals who play the game may know, Genshin has a pretty terrible community, or at least one with a bad reputation. And if you're watching this as a Blue Archive or an Arknights player, then I think you relatively know how different communities can be around certain games. Developers feed into this as well. You also have how the community and developers interact with each other around anniversary, how players feel they are treated, which long-term support are they getting, or is it a situation in which a developer makes the game, it pushes it for like a year or two, doesn't add any long-term features, and then just ditches to go to another and make another game. And I think if we're looking at this comparatively, Arknights and Blue Archive have a lot of content. If you're a Blue Archive global player, you know everything that's sort of coming along in JP, because you can look at what they've had and kind of plan things out from here. If you're an Arknights player, once again, keep in mind, I'm not as proficient in terms of Arknights and how that community works compared to Blue Archive and Genshin Impact, so a lot of this, please take it with a grain of salt. However, from my own personal experience, Arknights players are not only a bit more lenient overall, like a lot of Arknights players are very, very welcoming, but you also have the fact that the developers seem to keep on good terms with the community itself. Not only with information pretty much being widely available, but you also have the fact that around anniversary, maintenance, or large-scale events, there is a pretty high chance of either A, the shop itself resetting, in which case you have new packs and bonuses available for those who choose to purchase things, but at the same time you also have rewards being given out. Either way, I do believe that communities can have a very positive impact on not only the player experience, but also from a developer standpoint. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with the concept of how Genshin's community interacts with their VAs and their developers can negatively impact the experience of everyone as a whole. I don't think communities that actively choose to harass or fight the company really have good experiences. And I do believe that the more welcoming communities, even Honkai, despite it being a sort of sister game to Genshin at this point, a much older game obviously, but a sister game nonetheless to Genshin Impact, has a much more welcoming and settled community in comparison to the younger ones. I think Blue Archive, Arknights, Honkai, Azur Lane, and Fate Go do have much more settled and well-respected communities overall in comparison to Genshin, and I don't think it's entirely due to just the size of Genshin Impact. I think the community itself is a lot more immature overall in comparison to other games. But that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear yours. If you have negative experiences with any community, tell me down below. If you have positive experiences, tell me as well. Join the Discord server as it will be linked in the description, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.